2 hours before my wedding, I was standing in front of a mirror while my best friend adjusted my veil. The flowers had arrived, the musicians were rehearsing, the chapel doors were closed, and the man I loved was waiting on the other side of them. My father had promised he would be there early. Then my phone buzzed. My older sister Melissa had written in our family group chat, "If Dad skips my promotion celebration to attend Emily's wedding, then he is no longer my father." I stared at the message, certain it had to be some cruel joke. My wedding had been scheduled for more than a year. Melissa had announced her celebration only 3 days earlier. 8 minutes later, my father sent me 6 words. "I can't walk you down the aisle." No explanation. No apology. No phone call. Just a message informing me that, on the most important day of my life, he had chosen my sister again. When the chapel doors opened that afternoon, I did not walk alone. And when my father finally appeared at the reception, he saw someone else standing in the place he had abandoned. But that was not the truth that destroyed him. The real truth arrived later, hidden inside a short video recorded at a bar across town. That video proved there had never been a promotion celebration that afternoon. My sister had created the entire event for one reason. She wanted to prove that she could make our father abandon me. And she succeeded. What she did not understand was that, by taking him away, she forced me to see something I had avoided for years. Family is not measured by who claims the title. It is measured by who is standing beside you when the doors finally open. My name is Emily Parker, and until the morning of my wedding, I believed there was still one promise my father would never break. I was 26 years old, a software engineer, and more independent than anyone in my family seemed willing to acknowledge. I had earned scholarships, worked nights during college, and built a career without financial help from my father or my sister. I paid my own bills, made my own decisions, and had spent years creating a life that did not collapse whenever my family became chaotic. Still, there was one part of me that remained 13 years old. That was how old I had been when my mother died. At her funeral, my father had held my hand beside the casket and whispered, "I will always be there for the important moments." I believed him because children believe the promises made by grieving parents. Over the years, that promise weakened. It did not break all at once. It broke gradually, one missed moment at a time. When I received a scholarship at 17, my father missed the ceremony because Melissa needed help moving furniture. When I graduated from college, he arrived after my name had been called because he had gone with Melissa to test drive a new car. When I received my first promotion, he canceled dinner because Melissa had an argument with her boyfriend and demanded that he come over. Each time, he apologized. Each time, he promised the next important moment would be different. My wedding was supposed to be that moment. Michael Carter and I had been together for 4 years. He was patient, kind, and calm in ways that made me realize how exhausting my family had always been. He did not raise his voice to prove he cared. He did not create emergencies to demand attention. He simply showed up. Our wedding was taking place at a historic estate outside the city. The chapel stood at the end of a stone courtyard, and the reception hall overlooked a garden filled with white roses and lanterns. The ceremony was scheduled for 2:15 in the afternoon. At 12:15, I was in the bridal suite with Jessica and Tara, my closest friends and bridesmaids. Jessica stood behind me, securing the last pin in my veil. Tara was checking the bouquet and arguing with the photographer about where the family portraits should be taken. "You look too calm," Jessica said. "My panic is highly organized." That is the most Emily sentence ever spoken. I smiled at my reflection. My gown was made of ivory silk, with a fitted bodice and a soft skirt that moved like water when I walked. My mother had once sketched a similar dress in the margin of a magazine when I was little. I still had the page stored in a box at home. My father had texted at 11:30. "Leaving soon. Wouldn't miss this for the world." I had read the message several times. Not because it was unusual for him to say something reassuring, because it was unusual for me to believe him. At 12:15, my phone buzzed on the vanity. Jessica picked it up. Family chat. I held out my hand. The message was from Melissa. "If Dad skips my promotion celebration to attend Emily's wedding, Then he is no longer my father. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood the sentence. I read it again. Melissa was 31 years old and had always possessed a talent for turning ordinary events into tests of loyalty. 3 days earlier, she had announced that she was receiving a promotion at the consulting firm where she worked. According to her, several senior executives were gathering that Saturday afternoon for a private celebration. The timing had immediately seemed strange. My wedding invitations had been mailed more than 10 months earlier. Melissa knew the date. She knew the ceremony time. She had asked Jessica about it twice during the previous month, claiming she needed to organize her transportation. My father had asked Melissa for the event address in the family chat. She had replied that she would send it privately. No formal invitation appeared. No company announcement was shared. Still, I had chosen not to question it. Melissa had a way of making skepticism feel like jealousy. Replies began appearing beneath her message. Aunt Lorraine wrote, "Melissa, today is Emily's wedding." Uncle Frank added, "This is unnecessary." Melissa responded immediately, "My promotion changes my future. Emily can get married any day." A cold pressure spread through my chest. I typed, "Dad promised he would be here." The message sat unanswered. Then I saw the words Richard is typing. They disappeared. Appeared again. Disappeared. At 12:23, my father sent me a private message. "I'm sorry. I can't walk you down the aisle." That was all. I called him. He did not answer. I called again. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail. "Dad," I said after the tone, "please call me. The ceremony starts in less than 2 hours. I don't understand what is happening." My voice broke on the final word. When I ended the call, Jessica was already moving toward me. "He chose her," I whispered. Tara knelt in front of my chair. "Look at me. He chose her again." That final word carried every empty chair I had ever searched. Every apology I had accepted. Every time I had told myself that being the stronger daughter meant needing less. Jessica took the phone from my hand. "You do not have to decide anything right now. I have a procession scheduled. The coordinator can adjust it. My father is supposed to walk me." The statement sounded childish once it left my mouth. Not because the desire was childish, because I was still speaking as though the promise controlled reality. At 12:31, the venue coordinator knocked. "Emily, your father has not checked in yet. Should we make a change to the processional order?" Jessica opened the door only slightly. "Give us 10 minutes. The door closed. I stared at myself in the mirror. One tear moved down my cheek. I wiped it away before it reached my jaw. What do I do? No one answered immediately. Then my phone buzzed again. The name on the screen was Uncle David, my father's older brother. He was the man who had attended school plays when my father was late, sent birthday cards every year, and stood beside me in graduation photographs without demanding credit for being there. I answered. "Hello?" His voice was low and steady. "Emily, I just spoke with Richard." My throat tightened. "He told you?" "He told me he was going to Melissa's event." I closed my eyes. Uncle David paused. "Sweetheart, I need to ask you something." "What?" "Would you allow me the honor of walking you down the aisle?" For several seconds, I could not breathe. "You would do that?" "In a heartbeat." "Where are you?" "About 25 minutes away." "You were already coming?" "I was invited to your wedding." The answer was so simple that it hurt. He had never considered not coming. "I'll be waiting," I whispered. "No," he said gently. "You keep getting ready. I will be the one waiting for you." When the call ended, I held the phone against my chest. For the first time since my father's message, I felt something steadier than grief. One man had walked away. Another had already started driving toward me. At 12:40, Jessica repaired the makeup beneath my eyes, while Tara forced me to drink water. Neither of them told me to calm down. That was one of the reasons they were my friends. They did not treat pain as an inconvenience that needed to be hidden quickly. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Michael. "My mother told me something happened. I am here. Tell me what you need." I replied, "Stay in the chapel. I do not want you to see me yet." His response came almost immediately. "I will stay, but if you call, I will be there in 10 seconds." I smiled despite myself. Michael did not try to take over my decisions. He made sure I knew I was not making them alone. Jessica watched me put the phone down. There is something I need to show you. Her tone changed the air in the room. What? She reached into her clutch and opened an old message on her phone. Melissa sent this to me by mistake about 3 weeks ago. The message read, I finally figured out how to keep Dad with me that afternoon. Do not tell Emily. She will make it dramatic. I looked at Jessica. Why did you not tell me? Her face tightened with guilt. I should have. At the time, I did not understand what she meant. What did you think she meant? She had been talking about lunch with your father. I thought she wanted him to help with her promotion celebration before the ceremony. You were already dealing with the seating dispute, the florist, and Melissa refusing to confirm whether she was attending. I did not want to add another vague problem. I read the message again. The wording was deliberate but not specific. That was how Melissa operated. She rarely announced that she intended to hurt someone. She created a situation where harm became inevitable, then acted shocked when anyone accused her of planning it. Growing up, she never said, Dad, ignore Emily. She said, I need you. I cannot do this alone. If you leave, I will know who matters more. I was quieter. I learned early that distress made my father anxious. If I cried, he became uncomfortable. If Melissa cried, he became useful. Over time, he began confusing volume with need. Whenever Melissa created a crisis, I said, I was fine because I wanted to make things easier. My father rewarded that strength by giving me less. What exactly did she tell him about the promotion? Tara asked. I do not know. Did anyone see an invitation? No. Did she name the executives attending? No. Jessica frowned. She asked me for the ceremony schedule twice. I looked at her. When? Once about a month ago and again last week. What did you tell her? That the procession would begin around 2:15, and guests should arrive before 2. Tara folded her arms. She was planning around it. The thought settled heavily. Melissa had refused to be a bridesmaid 6 months earlier. She claimed the wedding placed too much attention on one person. At the time, I had laughed because the hypocrisy was almost impressive. She still said she would attend. Now, it seemed she had never intended to. At 12:47, Aunt Lorraine called. I answered. Emily, I am so sorry. Where is Dad? He left home about 15 minutes ago. For Melissa. I believe so. Did he say where he was going? No. He told your Uncle Frank that he was trying to keep the family from falling apart. A bitter laugh escaped me. The family is falling apart because he left my wedding. I know. Does he? There was a pause. Not yet. I looked at my reflection. The pearls I had planned to wear were still missing because the jewelry box had not arrived from the hotel safe. My veil was pinned, but I felt unfinished in every possible way. I need you to do something, I told Aunt Lorraine. Anything. Do not argue with him in the group chat. Do not tell the guests. I do not want my wedding to become a public trial. Are you sure? Yes. What about Melissa? She already made her choice. Aunt Lorraine's voice softened. David is on his way. I know. He loves you. I know that now. After the call ended, Catherine entered. Michael's mother wore a soft blue gown and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew how to enter a crisis without enlarging it. She crossed the room and took my hands. David called me from the road, she said. He asked me to make sure you were not alone. That sentence affected me more than anything else. Even while driving toward me, Uncle David had thought about what I might need before he arrived. Catherine sat beside me. When I married Gregory, she said, my father refused to attend. I knew that Catherine had grown up Catholic and Gregory was Jewish, but I had never heard the full story. My father believed that marrying outside the faith meant I was rejecting him, she continued. I watched the chapel doors through the entire ceremony because I thought he might change his mind. Did he? No. I am sorry. So was I. For years. She squeezed my hand. The hardest part was not the wedding itself. The hardest part was spending the next decade trying to earn back something I had never taken from him. Her words settled inside me. My father says he loves me. I believe he does. I looked at her. Then how can he do this? Catherine did not answer quickly. Love does not automatically make someone brave, she said. A person can love you and still make cowardly choices. A person can love you and still fail to protect you. That was the truth I had resisted for years. I had used my father's love as evidence that his behavior could not mean what it clearly meant. He thinks Melissa needs him more, I said. Perhaps Melissa makes him feel more necessary. The distinction hurt. Catherine touched my cheek. You are about to marry a man who will not require you to compete for basic loyalty. Do not let another person's failure become the center of this day. I am afraid every photograph will remind me that he was not here. Then fill the photographs with the people who were. At 12:55, hurried footsteps sounded in the hallway. The door opened. Uncle David stood there with wind-blown silver hair, his jacket unbuttoned and his expression filled with concern. For 1 second, no one moved. Then I crossed the room. He held me tightly. I am here, he whispered. Those 3 words contained more love than every explanation my father had ever offered. Uncle David did not ask me to explain what had happened. He did not defend my father. He did not say Melissa was emotional, confused, or under pressure. He simply held me until I stopped shaking. When we stepped apart, he looked at my face. You look like your mother. Everyone says that when I cry. She cried often. She would hate that description. She would argue with me for an hour. I laughed. The sound surprised me. Uncle David reached inside his jacket and removed a small velvet box. The corners were worn, and the clasp had faded with age. I brought something. He opened it. Inside was a strand of pearls. They were delicate and slightly uneven. I recognized them from my grandmother's wedding photograph. These were Grandma's. She wore them when she married your grandfather. How did you get them? She trusted me to keep them safe until the right day came. He did not turn the answer into an insult toward my father. He did not need to. Uncle David lifted the pearls and fastened them around my neck. They rested cool against my skin. Then he reached into his pocket again and unfolded a small handkerchief. The fabric had yellowed slightly, and the initials LMP were stitched into one corner. Linda Marie Parker. My mother. My breath caught. She gave this to me during the last month of her life, Uncle David said. I touched the embroidery. What did she say? His expression softened. She said you might need someone steady after she was gone. The room became silent. She did not predict today, he continued. She did not say your father would fail you. She knew Richard loved you. But she also knew grief could change people, and she knew he sometimes avoided difficult choices. She asked me not to let you feel alone if there ever came a moment when he could not be what you needed. My eyes filled. You kept it all these years? I kept the promise. The words were simple. That was what made them powerful. My father had made dramatic promises in emotional moments, then forgotten them when keeping them became inconvenient. Uncle David had accepted one quiet responsibility and carried it for 13 years. He placed the handkerchief in my palm. I thought about giving it to you when you graduated, he said. Then when you got your first apartment. But the moment never felt right. And today does? Today you are beginning a new family. Your mother should be close. Jessica turned away to wipe her eyes. Tara cried openly. Catherine stood near the window with one hand over her mouth. At 1:40, the coordinator returned. 35 minutes until the ceremony. Uncle David looked at me. Would you like to practice? I think so. He offered his arm. We walked from the bridal suite into the empty chapel. Sunlight entered through stained glass and painted the floor in red, blue, and gold. The florist was adjusting the last arrangement near the altar. When she saw us, she quietly stepped away. The aisle looked much longer without guests. Uncle David stood beside me. Ready? No. Good. I looked at him. People who say they are ready for major life events are usually lying. We started walking. My first steps were careful because of the dress. He adjusted his pace without comment. Halfway down the aisle, I stopped. I thought it would be him. I know. I kept giving him chances, because I thought one day he would choose me without being forced. Uncle David turned toward me. Today is not proof that you were not worth choosing. It feels like it. It is proof that Richard made a weak choice. The distinction mattered. What if I remember only that he was missing? Then we create a stronger memory. He faced the altar. Picture Michael standing there. I did. Now picture the pews. I imagined Jessica, Tara, Catherine, Gregory, Aunt Lorraine, Uncle Frank, my coworkers, and the people who had traveled hours to celebrate us. Your father's absence is one empty space, Uncle David said. Do not allow one empty space to erase a room full of people. We continued. At the altar, he placed my hand into an invisible one. No one gives you away, he said. You are not property. I am simply walking beside you until you choose the next step. That sounds like Mom. She complained about the same phrase at her wedding. I wish she were here. So do I. He touched the handkerchief tucked inside my gown. In one way, she is. We practiced only once. That was enough. When we returned to the bridal suite, I saw a message from Melissa. It contained a photograph. She wore a red dress and held a glass of champagne. The room behind her was dark but elegant, with high windows and a sign partly visible above the bar. The caption read, "A day for important milestones." The timestamp showed 1:32. Jessica looked over my shoulder. That does not look like a company function. It could be a private room. Tara enlarged the image. Is that Olivia? Olivia was one of Melissa's college friends. She does not work at Melissa's firm, I said. Neither does the man beside her, Jessica added. I looked at the sign. Only part of the name was visible. Bare. The coordinator called from the hallway. 20 minutes. I placed the phone face down. Whatever Melissa was doing, I would not allow her to pull me away from my own wedding. At 1:55, my phone buzzed again. This time the message came from my father. I am trying to handle this. I am sorry. I did not reply. At 2:05, Uncle David and I stood behind the chapel doors. The string quartet began to play. My heart pounded beneath my mother's handkerchief. Last chance to run, Uncle David whispered. Are you encouraging me to abandon my wedding? I am reminding you that choice matters. I tightened my hand around his arm. I choose to stay. Then let us go. The chapel doors opened at 2:15. Sunlight crossed the aisle. Every guest turned toward us. For one brief moment, I saw surprise on several faces. Most people had expected my father. Then the surprise softened into understanding. Aunt Lorraine pressed her fingers to her lips. Uncle Frank lowered his head. Catherine smiled through tears. At the altar, Michael looked at me. He was crying. Not dramatically. Not for attention. He simply looked relieved that I had arrived. I began walking. Each step felt like a decision. I was not walking toward a life where no one would ever disappoint me. I was walking toward a man who had shown me that love did not have to feel like competition. Halfway down the aisle, Uncle David leaned closer. Your mother would be proud. I could not answer without crying. When we reached the altar, Michael extended his hand. Uncle David placed mine inside it, then kissed my forehead. No one gives you away, he whispered. You choose. I choose. Reverend Ellis began the ceremony. She spoke about commitment, honesty, and the kind of love built from repeated actions rather than grand declarations. Then she looked toward Uncle David. Some bonds begin in blood, she said. Others are proven through presence. Both can become sacred when they are carried with love. The sentence was brief. It did not explain what had happened. It did not need to. Michael and I exchanged vows. He promised that I would never have to compete for his loyalty. I promised to build a home where honesty would be safer than silence. When we kissed, the chapel filled with applause. For the first time since my father's message, I was not thinking about him. I was married. Outside, guests gathered in the courtyard while the reception hall was prepared. Michael pulled me near the garden. What happened? My father chose Melissa's celebration. His jaw tightened. I am sorry. I do not want you to confront him. I will not. Or Melissa. I will follow your lead. That answer mattered. Michael never confused protection with control. I showed him Melissa's photograph. He studied the background. I know that place. You do? It is called Barrett House. A corporate venue? It has private rooms. Companies sometimes rent them. That possibility prevented the photograph from proving anything. But the room she is in is usually used for social events, he added. So it could still be real. It could. His uncertainty was honest. He did not tell me what I wanted to hear. At 2:50, the reception began. Michael and I entered to applause. We danced. For several minutes, everything else disappeared. Afterward, Uncle David joined me for a short dance. He moved slowly so he would not step on my dress. "You look happy," he said. "I am." "Good. That is all? I have advice if you insist." "I knew it. Never marry anyone who refuses to share dessert." I laughed. Across the room, Catherine lifted her glass toward us. Dinner began. No announcement was made about my father. Guests who knew what happened were discreet. Those who did not assumed Uncle David had always been part of the plan. At 3:20, Jessica approached our table. Melissa posted another story. I looked at the phone. The video showed the same lounge. Music played. Melissa and her friends raised glasses. There were no visible company logos, presentation screens, or senior executives. Still, the clip did not prove there had never been a formal gathering earlier. "What does she say?" "Nothing clear." Michael watched the video twice. "Save it." Jessica looked at me. I shook my head. "Not now." At 3:25, Gregory quietly asked Michael to step aside. They spoke near the bar. When Michael returned, his expression had changed. My father received a call from Richard. My chest tightened. What did he say? He asked whether the ceremony had ended. I stared at him. Of course it ended. He says he is coming to the reception. Why? He did not explain. At that same time, across town, my father was leaving Barrett House. I learned later what had happened there. Melissa had sent him the address shortly before noon. She told him several regional partners from her firm would gather in the upstairs lounge at 12:45. When he arrived, only Melissa and 5 of her friends were present. He asked where the executives were. Melissa said their meeting had run late. She told him they would arrive shortly. When he checked the time and said he needed to leave for my ceremony, she began to cry. She accused him of always caring more about me. The accusation made no sense, but it activated the fear she had spent years building inside him. She told him that if he left before the partners arrived, she would never speak to him again. My father stayed. At 1:30, Melissa claimed the executives were joining by video call. At 1:45, she said the call had been delayed. At 1:55, she took his phone from the table and asked why he was watching the time. He demanded it back. She accused him of ruining her celebration. At 2:10, he saw the first photograph from my wedding posted by Aunt Lorraine. Uncle David was walking me down the aisle. My father stared at the image. He later told me that was the moment he realized the ceremony had begun without him. He stood to leave. Melissa blocked the door. She said, "If you walk out now, do not come back into my life." He still hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Even after seeing me in the chapel, he paused because disappointing Melissa still frightened him more than failing me. Then one of her friends casually mentioned that the official promotion announcement would happen on Monday. My father turned toward Melissa. He asked what she meant. Melissa said the company celebration had been rescheduled. That was when he understood that there had never been a formal corporate event that afternoon. He left. He drove toward my reception with his tie crooked, his jacket wrinkled, and his phone full of photographs from a ceremony he had missed. At 3:48, the reception doors opened. My father stood there. His eyes moved through the room until they found me. I was beside Uncle David. Richard stopped. He saw the pearls around my neck. He saw my hand resting on his brother's arm. He saw the place he had abandoned filled by someone who had never asked to be begged. For a long moment, he did not move. Then he entered alone. My father had always known how to arrive, as though arrival itself deserved forgiveness. When he missed my scholarship ceremony, he brought flowers. When he arrived late to my graduation, he insisted on taking photographs outside the empty auditorium. When he canceled my promotion dinner, he sent wine the next day. He believed remorse could be carried in a bag. At my wedding reception, he carried nothing. Perhaps he finally understood there was no gift large enough to disguise what he had done. Catherine met him near the entrance. I watched him begin explaining. She listened without expression, then pointed toward an empty table near the wall. Richard nodded and sat alone. No one ordered him to leave. No one publicly humiliated him. Relatives greeted him briefly and returned to the celebration. The absence of confrontation seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. He expected the room to stop because he had entered. It did not. Dinner continued. The band played. Guests laughed. He watched from the edge as Uncle David spoke with Michael's parents. He watched Jessica and Tara pull me into photographs. He watched me dance with my husband. Twice, he stood. Twice, he sat again. At 4:15, the photographer gathered the family. Bride's side first. Aunt Lorraine, Uncle Frank, Uncle David, Jessica, and Tara moved toward us. The photographer looked around. Where is the bride's father? The question traveled farther than he intended. My father began to rise. I placed my hand on Uncle David's arm. He is right here. The photographer paused. Then he understood. Perfect, sir, stand beside the bride. Uncle David looked at me. You are sure? Yes. He stood at my side. The camera lifted. In the background, my father remained beside his table. The shutter clicked. I did not say the words to punish him. I said them because, in that moment, they were true. Father was not simply a biological title. It was the person who had arrived before the doors opened. When the photographs ended, my father approached. Emily. His voice was smaller than I remembered. Michael moved closer but said nothing. Why are you here? I asked. The question surprised him. I came as soon as I could. That is not what I asked. He looked toward Uncle David. Can we speak privately? Not yet. Please. I did not want the conversation to become a performance. 5 minutes, I said. In the courtyard. Michael touched my hand. I will be nearby. My father and I stepped outside. The afternoon light was fading. Music from the reception followed us through the doors. Richard rubbed the back of his neck. I made a terrible mistake. Yes. Melissa lied to me. Yes. She told me senior partners were coming. And when they did not? She said they were delayed. And you stayed. She became upset when I tried to leave. I waited. She said if I left, I was choosing you over her. I almost laughed. Again? His face tightened. I know how that sounds. No, Dad. I do not think you do. He stepped closer. I thought I could attend both. You texted me that you could not walk me down the aisle because she threatened to cut me off, and that frightened you more than abandoning me. He looked away. I did not understand what she was doing. You understood the time. Yes. You understood your promise. Yes. You understood that I was waiting. His shoulders fell. Yes. I looked through the reception doors. Guests moved beneath the lights. You chose the easier person to disappoint. The sentence stopped him. Melissa shouted, threatened, and punished. I became quiet. He had spent years rewarding the person who made consequences loud. I saw the photographs, he said, after the ceremony started. Yes. And you still did not leave immediately. His eyes closed. I hesitated. The honesty surprised me. Why? Because I was ashamed. And because part of me still thought I could calm her down before I left. You were still trying to protect her feelings while I was walking down the aisle without you. He did not answer. I am sorry, he said finally. I believe you regret it. Hope appeared briefly in his face. But regret does not make this better. The hope disappeared. I love you. I know. He looked relieved. That is why it hurts. He swallowed. What do you want me to do? For years, I had given him instructions. Call me. Show up. Remember the date. Do not cancel. Every instruction allowed him to treat responsibility like a task I managed for him. You figure that out. He stared at me. I do not know how. That is no longer my job. I turned toward the door. Emily. I stopped. May I stay? Yes. May I speak later? Not publicly. I need people to know I was wrong. They know. I need you to know. I already do. I returned inside. He followed several minutes later and resumed his place near the edge. At 4:40, Jessica approached me again. Her expression was different this time. Not angry. Alarmed. Olivia contacted me. Melissa's friend? Yes. Jessica held up her phone. She asked whether your father actually missed the ceremony. What did you say? The truth. And she says she recorded something at Barrett House because she realized Melissa had lied to everyone there too. My stomach tightened. What kind of something? A video. Have you watched it? Yes. What does it show? Jessica lowered her voice. Melissa admitting the promotion event was never scheduled for today. I looked toward my father. Anything else? Jessica hesitated. She says she planned this for weeks. The room seemed to narrow around me. Where's the video? Olivia sent it to me directly. She says I can show you, but she does not want it posted. That mattered. Olivia had not recorded the confession to create public humiliation. She had recorded it because, after my father arrived in a wedding suit and Melissa began laughing about my ceremony, Olivia realized something was seriously wrong. Not here, I said. Michael joined us. We moved into a quiet side room with Uncle David. Jessica closed the door. Then she pressed play. The video lasted less than a minute. That was enough. Melissa stood near the bar with a cocktail in her hand. Several friends were gathered around her. Olivia's voice came from behind the camera. Wait, your dad actually skipped the wedding? Melissa smiled. I told him if he left, he was choosing her over me. A man laughed. What about the company people? There are no company people today, Melissa said. The official announcement is Monday. Someone asked why she had told her father otherwise. Melissa raised her glass. Because Emily thinks this wedding proves she finally matters more. My chest tightened. The room in the video seemed to tilt. Melissa continued. I wanted her to look down that aisle and understand that Dad will still choose me. One of the women beside her frowned. That is cruel. Melissa rolled her eyes. It is not cruel. It is balance. Olivia asked, Did you plan this? For almost a month. Melissa laughed. I even made Jessica confirm the ceremony time. Dad always folds when he thinks I might cut him off. I knew he would stay. The video ended. No one spoke. Michael's hand closed around mine. Jessica looked sick. I am sorry, she whispered. I gave her the time. You did not know. But she used me. She used everyone. Uncle David stared at the blank screen. Why did Olivia record it? Jessica opened Olivia's messages. She says she started filming because she thought Melissa was joking. Then she saw Richard arrive in a wedding suit. When Melissa began bragging, Olivia understood the story was real. Why send it now? She saw the photographs from the ceremony. She felt responsible for staying at the party after she realized what happened. Does she want the family to see it? No. She asked that it not be posted anywhere. She only wanted you to know the truth. That made the evidence more believable. Olivia was not trying to become a hero. She was trying to correct her own silence. Michael looked at me. You do not need to do anything tonight. I know. Uncle David asked, Should Richard see it? I looked through the wall toward the reception. My father believed Melissa had created a last-minute lie to keep him there. The video proved she had built the plan for nearly a month. It proved she did not merely want his presence. She wanted my humiliation. He should see it, I said. Privately. Jessica nodded. We returned to the reception. My father was still at his table. I approached him. Come with me. He stood immediately. Michael, Uncle David, and Jessica followed us into the side room. Richard looked between us. What is happening? Olivia recorded something at Barrett House, I said. His face changed. Jessica pressed play. My father watched. When Melissa said the official announcement was Monday, he gripped the back of a chair. When she admitted she had used Jessica to confirm the ceremony time, he lowered himself into the seat. When she said she wanted me to understand that he would always choose her, his face emptied. The video ended. For several seconds, he stared at the screen. She planned it. No one answered. She knew exactly what she was doing. Yes, I said. I did not know. You knew she was forcing you to choose. I did not know the entire event was designed to hurt you. That changes what she did. It does not erase what you did. He flinched. I was used. You were willing to be used because the alternative was telling Melissa no. His eyes filled. I thought she needed me. She needed control. I was trying to keep her from leaving the family. And you abandoned me to do it. He looked down. Jessica quietly offered to show him screenshots Olivia had also sent. Melissa had written in a private group, "I need Dad occupied during the wedding." Another message said, "Emily thinks everyone will finally focus on her. I want her to know she is still second." My father shook his head. "I cannot read more." "You should," Uncle David said. Richard looked at his brother. Uncle David's face held disappointment, not rage. "You should understand how long this was planned," he continued. "Not so you can blame Melissa for everything. So you understand why she believed the plan would work. I did not create this. You rewarded it." The words landed heavily. My father looked away. Michael moved closer to me. "This conversation can stop now." Richard nodded. "Yes, of course." I turned toward the door. "Behind me," he asked. "What do I do?" I stopped. For years, I would have answered. Call her. Confront her. Tell her the truth. Apologize to me. This time I refused to design his redemption. "You decide who you want to be after today," I said. "Then prove it without asking me to manage you." I returned to the reception. The music was louder outside the room. Guests were dancing. A child had crawled beneath one of the tables. Catherine was laughing near the cake. The world had continued. I took Michael's hand. "Dance with me." He searched my face. "Are you sure?" "Yes." We stepped onto the dance floor. For the first minute, I felt the weight of the video pressing against my ribs. Then Michael spun me gently, and the skirt of my dress opened around us. People clapped. I laughed, not because I had forgotten, because I was still capable of joy. Across the room, my father emerged from the side room. Before the video, he believed he had made one mistake under pressure. After the video, he understood something worse. Melissa had studied the pattern he had spent years creating. She knew who would win if she forced him to choose. And he proved her right. The reception moved into evening. Garden lanterns came on as the sky darkened. Guests carried drinks outside, and the band switched to songs that made elegance impossible. Michael and I cut the cake. Jessica and Tara gave a toast about the first night Michael tried to impress me by pretending he understood a programming joke. Gregory welcomed me into the Carter family with a speech that lasted less than 2 minutes and made half the room cry. My father remained quiet. For a while, I thought he would respect the boundary I had given him. Then the disc jockey invited relatives and friends to offer brief toasts. Several people formed a line. My father stood. I saw him take one step toward the microphone. Catherine saw him too. She moved between him and the line, so naturally that most guests did not notice. "I need to say something," he told her. "Not tonight. She deserves a public apology. She asked you not to make one. People need to know I was wrong. They already know." He glanced toward me. "I want to fix this." Catherine's expression remained calm. An apology is not more sincere because it has an audience. He looked down. "She told me not to speak." "Then respect the first clear boundary she has given you." For a moment, I expected him to argue. Instead, he stepped back. That was the first useful decision he made after arriving. Later, Great Aunt Ruth called his name. She was 90 years old and spoke with the authority of someone who had outlived nearly everyone capable of intimidating her. "Richard." He approached. She pointed to the empty chair beside her. "Sit." He sat. I did not hear the beginning of their conversation. Eventually, her voice carried. "This is not the first chair you have left empty." My father lowered his head. Uncle Frank joined them. "You always had a reason," he said, "but reasons do not stand in for a father." Aunt Lorraine folded her hands. "We all loved Melissa through her storms. You let her storms become the weather for everyone else." Richard did not defend himself. That mattered, but it did not erase anything. Near the end of the evening, he approached me again. This time, he stopped several feet away. "May I speak?" I nodded. He kept his voice low. "I understand why you do not want me to apologize publicly." "Good. I wanted everyone to know I was wrong. They know." He looked around. "I suppose they do. What happened today is not only about Melissa lying. I know. It is not a misunderstanding. I know. You chose the easier person to disappoint." His eyes closed briefly. "Yes." The answer surprised me. He did not argue. He continued. You were always the one who said you were fine, Melissa cried, threatened, and made everything urgent. I told myself you were stronger. I was a child. I know that now. You should have known then. Yes. His voice broke. For a second, I saw the man who had held my hand at my mother's funeral. Then I remembered that grief did not excuse 13 years of repetition. I saw the pearls, he said. They were Grandma's. I know. David kept them. He looked toward his brother. I did not know she gave them to him. She trusted him to keep them safe. What else did he give you? Mom's handkerchief. His face changed. She gave it to him? She asked him not to let me feel alone. My father looked as if the words had taken something from him. She said that? Yes. He lowered his eyes. I failed her too. This is not about Mom. You are right. He took a breath. I keep explaining because I want you to understand that I did not wake up intending to hurt you. I know. Hope appeared briefly. I continued. But I was still the one standing there without a father. The hope stopped. I am sorry. I know. Can you forgive me? Not tonight. When? I do not know. What happens now? Tonight, you go home. His face fell. Tomorrow, you do not call me. How long? I need space that is not negotiated around your discomfort. He looked toward Michael. And after that? If I decide to meet you, you will listen. You will not blame Melissa. You will not ask me to reassure you that you are still a good father. His eyes filled. Am I? The question sounded painfully young, but I would not rescue him from the answer. You have loved me badly. His face broke. I continued before he could respond. That does not mean you can never do better, but doing better will take more than being sorry at a wedding. He wiped at his eye. I understand. I hope you do. He nodded. Then he looked toward Uncle David. You called him your father. I said he was right there. What does that make me? I looked at him for a long moment. That depends on what you do after today. He left before the final dance. No one announced his departure. At the door, he turned back. I was standing between Michael and Uncle David while the photographer arranged another picture. Our eyes met. He raised one hand. I did not wave, but I did not look away. Then he left. The door closed. The music continued. The final hour of the reception was the happiest. Once my father left, the tension drained from the room. Not because I was happy he was gone, because I no longer had to watch him watch me. The garden filled with laughter. Michael's cousins danced badly and proudly. Catherine removed her shoes. Gregory pretended not to recognize her. Uncle David stood near the edge of the dance floor. I walked toward him. You look tired. I drove too fast, I assumed. Do not tell anyone. I smiled. Then I became serious. Thank you. You already thanked me. Not for today. He looked at me. For all the other days. His expression softened. You noticed? I noticed the school plays, the birthday cards, the graduation photograph you took after Dad arrived late. You looked furious in that photograph. I was. You still framed it. You were in it. His eyes filled. I reached for his hand. I meant what I said when the photographer asked where my father was. I do not want to replace Richard. You are not replacing anyone. I am his brother. And you have been a father figure in my life for years. He shook his head. I only showed up. That was the part that mattered. The final dance began. Michael approached and held out his hand. Mrs. Carter? I am still getting used to that. You have the rest of our lives. I took his hand. Before stepping onto the floor, I looked back at Uncle David. Come with us. This dance is usually for the couple. Today has not been usual. He joined us for the first moments. Michael spun me once, then offered my hand to Uncle David. We danced several steps before he returned me to my husband with a small bow. The room applauded. The photographer raised his camera. The shutter clicked. This time, there was no blurred figure in the background. Only the people who remained. Later, in the bridal suite, Jessica helped remove my veil, while Tara packed my belongings. My phone showed dozens of messages. Congratulations. Question. Several messages from my father. I did not open them. There were also 12 missed calls from Melissa. Then one final message appeared. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Michael saw the screen in the mirror. You do not have to answer. I know. For years, Melissa had controlled conversations by declaring herself injured before anyone could name what she had done. I typed. No one showed the video publicly. Dad saw it privately. Your actions embarrassed you. I added. Do not contact me again until you can speak without threats, lies, or blame. I sent it. Her reply came immediately. You stole Dad from me. I turned the phone off. Melissa still believed love was a possession. She thought one sister being supported meant the other had lost. She believed my wedding was a competition, and my father's attention was the prize. I was finished living inside that system. The next morning, Michael and I left for a short honeymoon in the mountains. I turned my phone on only once. My father had sent a message at 6:15. I watched the video again. I have no defense. I will give you the space you asked for. When you are ready, I will listen. I did not reply. But I saved the message. Not because it repaired anything, because for the first time, he had not included an explanation. Melissa faced consequences too. Olivia ended their friendship. 2 other people who had been present at Barrett House contacted me privately to apologize. They said they had believed Melissa was exaggerating until they saw my wedding photographs and realized my father had truly missed the ceremony. The family stopped responding to Melissa's emergencies automatically. When she called Aunt Lorraine and demanded that everyone condemn me, Aunt Lorraine asked one question. Are you in immediate danger? Melissa said no. Then we will discuss this when you can speak calmly. Melissa hung up. Uncle Frank refused to argue with her. Great Aunt Ruth told her, a threat only works when people are afraid to let you leave. For the first time, Melissa's silence did not send the entire family chasing after her. My father did not cut her off. I did not ask him to. But when she threatened never to speak to him again unless he denounced me, he answered, I love you. I will not participate in another ultimatum. She stopped speaking to him for several weeks. He allowed the silence to remain her responsibility. That was new. 8 weeks after the wedding, I agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe. He looked older. Not because 8 weeks had changed his face, because he was no longer hiding behind excuses. He had begun therapy. He did not mention that immediately, as though it were proof I owed him forgiveness. He waited until I asked what he had been doing. Then he listened. I told him about every empty chair, the scholarship ceremony, the graduation, the canceled dinners, the wedding aisle. I told him that I had spent years pretending not to need him because needing him had become humiliating. When I finished, he cried. I did not comfort him. That was part of the change. I kept telling myself you were strong, he said. I became strong because I could not rely on you. He nodded. I know. I do not know whether I can trust this version of you. You should not yet. The answer surprised me. He continued. I want to change, but I understand that wanting is not evidence. That was the first thing he said that sounded different from the man I had known. Trust did not return that day. It did not return all at once. He began arriving early when we agreed to meet. He stopped canceling plans when Melissa called. When she created a crisis, he asked whether she was in danger. If she said no, he kept his commitment. Sometimes he failed. Once, several months later, he nearly left a dinner because Melissa sent 20 messages in 10 minutes. He stood beside the table with his coat in his hand. Then he stopped. He called her and asked whether she was safe. She said yes, but accused him of choosing me. He replied, I am keeping a promise. Then he sat down. I did not praise him. Keeping a promise should not require applause. But I noticed. Melissa eventually admitted that there had never been a company event on my wedding day. She did not apologize. She said she had been trying to prove a point. I told her she had. She had proven that our father's weakness could be used. She had also proven what happened when the family stopped rewarding her threats. She lost the control she had mistaken for love. We did not reconcile quickly. I did not know whether we ever would. That uncertainty no longer controlled me. My healing did not require Melissa to understand what she had done. It required me to stop negotiating my worth with her. The wedding photograph remained framed in our living room. Michael stood on one side of me. Uncle David stood on the other. The pearls rested against my throat. My smile was not victorious because my father had been exposed. It was victorious because betrayal had failed to take the day away from me. My father had chosen Melissa. Then I made a choice of my own. I chose the people who came without being chased. I chose love that did not demand competition. I chose boundaries without turning them into revenge. Most importantly, I chose not to let one empty space become the whole picture. For years, I believed family loyalty meant waiting endlessly for people to become who they had promised to be. My wedding taught me otherwise. Love can be real and still be unreliable. An apology can be sincere and still be insufficient. Forgiveness, when it comes, does not require us to restore someone immediately to the position they once held. My father was not erased from my life, but he was no longer allowed to define my worth through his choices. My sister's plan was exposed, but exposing her was never the true victory. The victory was walking down the aisle anyway. It was allowing Uncle David to stand beside me without calling him a substitute. It was trusting Michael when he offered support without trying to control my response. It was learning that a healthy family is not built from titles alone, but from consistency, honesty, and the willingness to show up when showing up costs something. Sometimes, the people who hurt us expect our pain to remain proof of their importance. Healing changes that. You stop begging them to understand. You stop arranging your happiness around their approval. You build a life so full of dependable love that their absence no longer controls the room. That was what happened to me. On the day I believed I had lost my father, I discovered that I had never been as alone as I thought. And the photograph from that wedding still reminds me of one simple truth. Family is not only who shares your blood. Family is who is standing beside you when the doors open.